Hi everyone, this will be a lecture series on DTensor. This first lecture will just quickly talk about what a DTensor is, how to play with DTensors in code, and then we'll talk about more complex topics in future lectures. So what is a DTensor? A DTensor is a way to represent a tensor in a distributed environment. So here we have a tensor x. This just is a normal tensor. If we call distributed tensor on x with a device mesh, which we'll get to later, and a placement type, in this case shard0, what this will do is it'll take x and it will shard x on the 0th dimension across our device mesh, which is our GPUs. And so in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4 goes to GPU1 and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 goes to GPU2. If we call distributed tensor x device mesh shard1, what we're saying is we want to shard this tensor on the first dimension, which is columns. And so in this case, 1, 2, 5, 6 goes to GPU1, 3, 4, 7, 8 goes to GPU2. And if we call distributed tensor replicate, what this says is, hey, take the entire tensor x and put it on both GPUs 1 and 2. Okay, so now let's look up some code. So at a high level, this is how you can play with DTensors. We have our imports. The setup distributed just sets up a bunch of the distributed primitives we'll need. And if we look down at this code, you can see here's the most interesting part. So we create a local tensor with dimensions 2 by 4, like we had in our Scala draw. We call distributed tensor to create a DTensor that's sharded on the first dimension, and then we call this function. And what you'll notice with this function is we're just calling redistribute to these various placement types 3 times and then returning. And if you run this, you'll end up generating TL parses that look as follows. So if you look at the inference graph, you'll see that the first operation is we convert it to placement replicate, and so DTensor under the hood does an all gather into this tensor. And then subsequently, when we change it to shard0 placement, which, as you can recall here, means we're sharding it by the rows, we do something quite interesting, which is we take our replicated tensor, which is the entire tensor, and we basically take the first row. Now what's interesting is you'll notice that we take the first row here, and if you look at the rank 1 TL parse, you'll see that it indexes into the first instead of the 0th split. And so this is the kind of the magic behind DTensor, where different ranks are slicing to different parts of the tensor, and so in future lectures we'll go more into how things like operators work in DTensor, how things like autograd and backwards graph works. But hopefully this gives you a quick overview of what DTensor is and builds an intuition that we can use for the rest of the lectures.